Hello and welcome to another Hand Drink Soda wine info video. And today we're covering a wine from a producer that we've covered a number of times over the last couple of years, and mostly because I guess I have a kind of a wine crush on what this winemaking team does. They really are quite phenomenal across a whole range of genres. I'm of course talking about Olifantsberg, and today we're discussing their Pinotage 2019, which is made by winemaker Elisme Visser from the region of the Breedekloof. Now, as I've said, for the most part, Breedekloof is a hot region that makes bulk wines. And yet Olifantsberg and a few other estates manage to somehow produce these classy, elegant, light-footed wines made from grapes that come out of the stinking hot Breedekloof. So, I mean, how is it even possible, right? I mean, for all Elisme's abundant talent as a winemaker, she still has to work with the fruit that is grown in her neighborhood, right? Well, perhaps it begins to make some sense if we take a look at how Olifantsberg is actually situated within the valley. As we can see, most of the valley is fairly flat, but Olifantsberg as an estate is laid out over the foothills of the Vineyard mountains. Now, the highest vineyards on the Olifants estate are the Roussan vineyards, which are up at around 480 meters above sea level, which, to give you some context, is roughly the same altitude as some fancy estates like Terroir, Elisme, and Defies up in Helswerchter. And even if we take a step down from their very tip-toppy Roussan vineyards, most of the estate is between 300 and 450 meters above sea level.
Whoop-de-doo! What does it all mean, Basil?
Mostly, it means that Olifantsberg is just a little bit cooler than the rest. In summer, when the valley is ridiculously hot, winemaker Elisme Visser shows me that Olifantsberg is roughly 2 degrees lower most days of the season. In winter, the mountains surrounding the entire valley get covered in snow, which does two things. First of all, in spring, it allows there to be a flow of water down into the valley as the snow melts, even if there's no rain. And in winter, it keeps temperatures far lower for longer, allowing longer dormancy for vines. Now, vine dormancy is incredibly important to vine health, but also a little bit boring. Vine health, however, is incredibly important to wine quality, which is far less boring. And even if I do convince you that vine dormancy will make wines taste more delicious, you might say, who cares about the snow hand? I just want to know what it tastes like. And to that, I would say fair deuce. So what's so amazing about this particular Pinotage is that it manages to be super classic in that you get all those aromas that you would expect from a Pinotage. Bit of smoky bacon and some lovely plum elements, but it has none of the old school banana, rubber, coffee elements that have come to characterize Pinotage over like the last 30 years. Although I did smell a little bit of chocolate in there, which is perhaps controversial, given that this is very much a Pinotage Nouveau wine, which is essentially what happens when winemakers work with Pinotage, but try instead to make it present more as a Pinot Noir, which is, of course, one of Pinotage's parents. So for the most part, this guy is all about red fruit. There's definitely some candied kind of straw or strawberry jam elements. Even some bright pomegranate, some tartar pomegranate notes, and some rather pleasant layers of red plum as well. And finally, and perhaps this is what takes it from being a kind of nice Pinotage straight through to a is the fact that below the savory notes and the smoky bacon and the red berries, at the bottom there's this kind of base element of a slightly richer, darker sort of roasted plum and black cherry, which is really what turns this thing into a fully dynamic, multi-layered expression of cultivar that is in no way overpowered by oak or false. And it's hard to argue against that recipe. And finally, when we talk about structure in a wine, we often think purely of tannins as being the thing that gives structure. But in this case, there's kind of a core of that red cherry fruit acidity, which is quite intense. And for me, the wine is held together by that acidity. And in fact, it's the acidity that provides structure to this particular wine. And you might say, that's amazing. How did she do it? Well, I'll tell you. As is most often the case with Olifantsberg wines, the wine was made in rather simple fashion. The grapes are all fermented in open-top wooden fermenters, and the wine is then matured in oak for 11 months. But what's interesting to note about the fermentation is that it is performed as whole berry fermentation. Now, this is not a whole bunch, so they take the stems out, but they keep, as far as possible, the berries uncrushed. And so what happens is, as fermentation starts at the beginning, you get intracellular fermentation. Fermentation happening inside the grape without the presence of any yeast, which of course, as I've said, in the case of carbonic maceration, triggers a whole different range of flavor compounds. So in this case, we talked about a little bit of almost cherry fizz pop, cherry candy element. That's the result of a small portion of semi-carbonic maceration fermentation going on. Before, of course, the CO2 in the grape bursts the grape skins and the juice runs out, and then a more conventional fermentation occurs. If you've cracked this, I would love to hear your thoughts. Leave a review at the bottom of this site, or if you're watching it on YouTube, then subscribe to the channel, because every week I release videos on South African wines where we focus on niche cultivars or rising star winemakers or some unusual regions that are producing great things that you should know about.